In this module, we will talk about the money and determination of prices. Money has always played a very important role in any economy. Its most crucial role is in the determination of price level. The relationship between money and prices can be viewed from the perspective of different schools of thought. The quantity theory of money, which is also known as QTM, refers to the proposition that there is one-on-one relationship between the quantity of money supplied in the economy and the price level. The QTM is an old theory dating back to Europe, where it was developed as a response to the influx of precious metals from the New World, and in this sense, it is one of the oldest theories in economics. Nevertheless, according to the records of the late mercantilist, does one start to find theoretical statements that justify the connection between money supply and price level. For classical economists, who basically functioned around Say's law, used this conjecture to explain money and prices. Q2M became a constituent component of their theory of value and distribution, but they defined one-sided causal relationship. According to classists, prices affected the quantity of money and not the other way around. So, for classists, money is endogenously determined, that is, determined within the economic framework. For neoclassist, the QTM was explained by Irving Fisher in 1867 to 1947. The Fisher's equation of exchange, which was given in 1911, can be stated as follows: MV plus M dash V dash is equals to PT, where M is the currency and M dash is the demand deposits. V and V dash are the respective velocities, and T stands for the total volume of transactions and not only for the final goods. Another important development was made by Knut Wicksell, who stressed upon the endogeneity of the money supply and its effect on the price level. The Keynesian economics in the 1930s gave very little attention to the QTM, and it was used only for the determination of nominal magnitudes of real variables. According to the Keynesian analysis, there is only an indirect relationship between the money supply in the economy, and that is through the interest rates. The monetarist who laid a characteristically different view, especially Milton Friedman, who gave much importance to money and said it is responsible for almost all economic phenomenon. In fact, Friedman illustrated that the major economic episodes in US economic history, from the Great Depression of 1930s to the inflation of 1970s, could be explained through the variations in money supply. He stressed that tight monetary policy was an ineffective instrument in bringing about the economic stability in that time. He stressed that in Great Depression of 1930s was primarily caused by the tight monetary policy adopted at that time. Further on, we shall study how each school of thought explained their conjecture on role of money in determination of prices, and they all are in harmony with the fact that money is neutral in the long run. After studying this module, you shall be able to know the different concepts related to the value of money, derive how money determines the prices in the economy, identify how money becomes neutral in the long run, evaluate short run and long run perspective on money, analyze interplay of output, employment, wages, money and prices. Let us now discuss the quantity theory of money. The quantity theory of money seeks to explain the value of money in terms of its quantity. Stated in simplest form, the quantity theory of money says that prices varies directly with the quantity of money. According to the quantity theory of money, double the supply of money and other things being constant, the prices will also double, and thus value of money would halved and vice versa. To explain the quantity theory of money, we first need to define some important term used in this concept. A. The volume of trade, B. The quantity of money, and C. The velocity of circulation of money. The first component is the volume of trade. By volume of trade, we mean the total transaction done in a given period. This is equal to the real value of goods and services produced in an economy. Greater the supply of goods and services in the economy, larger is the volume of trade. The classist believed that an economy at each time is at full employment, that is, output is at its potential. This simply means that given the total factor of production in a given time period, the real value of output produced is at its full employment. The second component is the determination of the level of prices in the economy is the quantity of money. It consists of notes and currency in the economy plus the credits or deposits created by the bank. The third component is the velocity of circulation. This simply means the number of times a money bill is circulated in the economy or the number of times a money bill changes its hand. This is required because money is used to buy goods and services whose value is further determined by the value added by each factor. The supply of money is never equal to the total output. The total output is equals to the stipulated money supply and the number of times money is circulated, that is, it changes hands to buy the goods and services. Next, we shall learn the Fisher's equation. The classes defined that level of prices in the economy is affected by the above mentioned components. They defined the relationship between the prices and money using the Fisher's equation of exchange, which is given as MV is equals to PY, where M is the money supply, V is the velocity of circulation, P is the price level in the economy, and Y is the real output in a given time period. Thus, the above mentioned is the famous equation of exchange. It explains that the nominal value of the output produced at a given period of time, that is Py, is equal to the quantity of money and velocity of circulation. They assumed velocity to be constant and that since output is always at its full employment, so it is constant as well. Then according to this equation, prices is directly related to the quantity of money in the economy. MV bar is equals to PY bar. So, if money supply is increased by say 10%, prices will also increase by 10% and vice versa. The classes defined inflation to be always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. This is so because the output is at its potential or full employment and hence cannot be increased. The velocity is also assumed to be constant in short run because it depends on the development of the banking and credit system and speed with which checks are cleared and loans are granted and repaid, and these practices do not change in the short run. Thus, the money and prices in the economy has direct relationship. This equation is an accounting identity and hence true by definition. This is because MV, which represents money spent in transactions, must be equals to PT, which represents money received from transactions. The quantity theory of money asserts that aggregate prices, that is P, and total money supply, that is M, are related according to the equation P is equals to Vm divided by Y, where Y is the real output and V is the velocity of money. With lowercase letters denoting percentage changes, that is growth rates, the quantity theory of money can be expressed as small p is equals to small v plus small m minus small y, with p as the rate of inflation and y, v and m as the growth rate of output, velocity and money stock respectively. A central implication of the quantity theory of money is that a given change in the rate of money growth induces an equal change in the inflation rate, prompting Milton Friedman to claim that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. A crucial assumption behind this claim is that the velocity of money or its growth rate is constant and money growth has no effect on the real GDP growth, at least at a sufficiently long time horizon. Now, we shall understand the classical dichotomy. The classical dichotomy refers to the idea that in an economy there coexist two kinds of variables, real and nominal. Real variables like output and employment are independent of monetary variables. In this view, the primary function of money is to act as a medium of exchange for the transactions to take place in an economy. This conception of money rests on the real analysis, which describes an ideal type economy as a system of barter between rational utility maximizing individuals. Hence, is just a medium of exchange. Thus, a social vehicle that has no efficacy other than to overcome the transaction cost concerning the inconvenience of barter, which result from the absence of a double coincidence of wants, a core disadvantage of barter system of trade. The classical dichotomy is an important interpretation of the quantity theory of money, which is given by the formula MV is equals to PY, where M stands for the money stock, V stands for the velocity of monies in circulation, P stands for the price level and Y is the level of income. The nominal output, that is PY, should be equals to the nominal money supply. Exogenous changes in the money supply ultimately condition the price level for a given level of economic activity. If an economic system is at full employment, the only effect of increase in the money supply is proportionate increase in the domestic price level, which gives rise to the depreciation of its currency's exchange rate. The direction of causality runs therefore from an exogenous money supply to the price level. This is interrelated with the natural interest rate theory, according to which when output is at full employment, there is a market determined interest rate level at which the market clears. Exogenous changes in the supply of money are those who shift the market rates of interest. This is the process by which discrepancies between market rates and the natural rate of interest rate are generated. A market rate of interest below the natural interest rate occurs when investment exceeds savings. Firms will demand more credit for investing. The result is an excess of investment over savings. If the economy is at full employment position defined by the natural rate of interest, a cumulative process of inflation unfolds. The rise in the price of consumption goods leads to a decrease in consumption. Involuntary savings rise until the excess of investment over savings is eventually eliminated. If market rate of interest are above the natural rate of interest, by contrast, savings exceeds investment and a cumulative process of deflation endures. In conclusion, the classical dichotomy implies that real variables and monetary variables are independent of each other. From a heterodox perspective, by contrast, both kinds of variables are explained by the relationship established between the central bank, bank lending and entrepreneurs' animal spirits every time effective demand is deemed profitable, reversing thereby the causality of the quantity theory of money formula. Further, we shall discuss about the long-run neutrality of money. The quantity theory of money predicts that in the long run, the quantity of money will not affect anything real. This result is called as the long-run neutrality of money. Suppose the people want to hold 5% of their income in money holding, that the long-run real level of output is 4,000 and that the money supply is $400. Aggregate demand will be $8,000 and the price level will be $2. If the money supply increases to $800, aggregate demand will be $16,000 at the full employment output of 4,000. The price level will double to $4. Nothing real has changed, only all the prices and all incomes have doubled in their dollar amounts. Points to note about this figure are: first, total spending is $8,000 at all points on AD, which is equals to $8,000 curve. Along this curve, the money supply is $400 and velocity is 20, that is K is equals to 0.05. Second, total spending is $16,000 at all points on the AD, which is equals to $16,000 curve. Along this curve, the money supply is $800 and the velocity is still 20. Third, the velocity stays unchanged in the quantity theory of money. Fourth, doubling the money supply from $400 to $800 doubles the price level from $2 to $4. 5. The price level can be found by dividing the aggregate demand by Q. One way to understand the quantity theory is to realize that while the Fed can change the nominal money supply in the long run, it has no effect on the real money supply. For example, at full employment, whatever the nominal money supply is, the real money supply will always be 5% of the real output, that is MS divided by P is equals to K into Q, or 200. The 200 stands for the output that money holding can buy, that is 200 baskets of goods. Another way to understand the quantity theory is that in the long run, increased aggregate demand, that is total dollar spending, can be increased in only two ways. One is to increase the money supply and the other is to decrease K, that is the fraction of income people wants to hold in money balances. Note that decreasing K is same thing as increasing velocity. For example, the introduction of credit cards most likely decreased the need for money holdings, resulting in a lower K. First, according to the quantity theory of money, people want to hold a certain fraction, that is K, of their income in money, that is MD is equals to K dollar GDP. Each dollar will be spent on average V times a year, where V is equals to 1 by K and V is known as velocity. Second, the quantity theory of money is MS into V is equals to P into Q, or MS is equals to K into P into Q. Third, the nominal money supply is fixed by the Fed. The real money supply is determined by the public in the long run, that is MS divided by P is equals to K into Q. Fourth, aggregate demand, that is GDP dollar, is equals to Ms into V is equals to Ms divided by K. Fifth, in the long run, changes in money supply affect only prices, not the output. Now, we will learn how to predict inflation. To predict inflation with the quantity theory, economists put the quantity theory into its percentage form. That is, percentage change in P is equals to percentage change in money supply minus percentage change in quantity plus percentage change in velocity, or percentage change in P is equals to percentage change in Ms minus percentage change in Q plus percentage change in K. Here percentage change stands for the percentage change. The percent change in prices is the rate of inflation. Percentage change in money supply is the growth rate in the real GDP. For example, if the money supply grows at 7%, output grows at 3% and velocity grows at 1%, the inflation rate will be 5%. For many years, the velocity of M2 grew at a steady 1% rate, making the equation remarkably accurate when applied to the long periods of time. In recent years, velocity has become less stable, making the equation less useful. We get the following predictions from this equation, each prediction holding the other variable unchanged. First, the rate of inflation will increase when the money supply grows at a faster rate. If growth rate in the money supply goes up by 5%, inflation will increase by 5%. Second, the rate of inflation will go down when output grows faster. If the GDP growth rate jumps from 1% a year to 3% a year, the inflation rate will be 2% lower. Third, high rate of inflation are always caused by the money supply, increasing changes in Q, and we are just too small to explain inflation rates exceeding 6%. At the peak of an expansion, commentators often say that rising output will fuel more inflation. Instead, as we can see, rising output douses inflation. The commentators are confusing cause and effect. A rising aggregate demand increases the total output in the short run, but in the long run, it leads to more inflation. The rise in output does not cause the higher prices. The rise in aggregate demand causes the output and then prices to rise. Had output expanded more, inflation would have been less. Let us now summarize what we have learnt in this module. It can be said that the quantity theory is yet again existed, yet contradicted. Its most recent demise had two causes, each a new manifestation of old weakness. First, money growth targeting a practical but diluted application of Friedman's policy proposals did not work well, and this happened in some measure because its adoption provoked institutional adaptations that then undermined it. This should not have come as a surprise to anyone aware of what the consequences of 1844 Bank Charter had been for the quantity theory's reputation in an earlier era, but evidently it did. Second, the new classical money supply surprise model of the cycle, a still quantity theory based successor of Friedman's and Squat's monetarist approach, reformulated the expectations augmented Phillips curve as an aggregate supply curve and hence reverted to the Fisher's hypothesis that price level fluctuations led those in real variables in the transmission mechanism of monetary impulses. It thus set itself up for gross empirical failure when faced with the basic facts of the timings of the real and nominal responses to monetary impulses that Friedman and Schwartz, among others, had so thoroughly documented in the meanwhile. Given these two failures, it was not surprising that most macroeconomists would soon discard the quantity theory and succumb to real business cycle theory and new Keynesian economics, neither of which leaves any significant space for money to play a role in the economy. The goal of stable money in the guise of inflation rates nevertheless survived the quantity theory's disappearance for a while, only to be threatened by yet another repetition of history, namely the apparent failure before 2008 as before 1929 of the price level to give a clear warning about the approach of a major economic crisis. Whether all this means that the quantity theory is finally dead, or only that it has gone into hiding prior to the beginning, yet another of its 9 times 90 lives remains to be seen. Historians of economics will be inclined to bet on the latter possibility and therefore continues to take an interest in this doctrine's earlier incarnations, not least that one which Irving Fisher did so much to shape.